Alrighty, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings Here on Earth and the difficulty of communicating on Earth. This video has an intent, okay, sort of, to convey an idea or notion of reality, some sort of connection of words and concepts and principles. And you're supposed to receive the clump of idea and process it and say, yes, I get that, and or no, I don't get that, and therefore reject it with some sort of those two words can't be put together. There's sentence structure. You're supposed to come up with some good reason, something besides semantics, and somehow point out how the idea or the concept or the fact somehow isn't meaningful or isn't correct or something, but some sort of rational error checking and saying, okay, there's something wrong with your thinking, and it's supposed to be some sort of demonstrable counter argument, and then I say, oh, I have to deal with the counter argument. There's some realness to it, and I have to deal with it. And none of that, somehow that process just can't take place here on Earth, which is just kind of funny. So, I watched two videos this morning. I mean, one by, Piro on physics. And it's just full of psychobabble, trolling, essentially. I mean, totally unresponsive to any of the arguments that have been made, and he just reasserts the same crap over again and over again and over again. And then the modern mystic doing essentially the same thing, where he's saying, well, I'm just saying there's no soul. When no, you're saying there's no brain. You're saying there's a brain that's doing everything, but the brain doesn't have any function, that everything we do is dog barking or something, and that somehow it doesn't matter whether the brain's a psycho killer or is looking for the new Salk vaccine that'll cure all diseases. Yeah, it does matter. It makes a lot of difference whether we have 1,000,000 years of suffering or one. Those things all matter. It really does matter how this outcome, there can be good outcomes and bad outcomes, and we can figure that part out. So you're denying that it makes any difference what the outcome is. Which just doesn't make any sense. If the population of Pompeii was twice as many people and they got to, slowly suffocated to death or something by ash or whatever, oh, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it matters. It's an important detail. Look, everything sentient matters. It says, how can you make a counter argument that everything sentient doesn't matter? That there's sentient beings who could be harmed in some brutal, horrible way, like somebody sticking steel rods in that little monkey's eyes. It's not a monkey. The little gorilla. That somehow it's okay. It doesn't matter. Who cares? What's the difference? What's the difference? I mean, shit. All right, so we don't even have a counter argument to that simple thing. Like, there's a difference between being eaten alive by a crocodile and, dying of a heart attack in your sleep or something. Yeah, there's a huge difference, especially, obviously to the individual that has to experience it, but we can all understand that if this was part of what was going to be imposed on us, we'd say, oh shit, it matters. If we're going to experience it, we certainly understand that it matters. So why does it not matter when it's not happening to us, right? I mean, that's just too obvious a question, right? But you can't get any straight answers. So, the objectors, won't give you anything to interact with. There's no, they don't deal with the actual argument. They deal with a bunch of fake arguments and really poorly characterized, and exaggerated, and and it's just that's what the communication comes down to, is that we all have to go to the troll level. I mean, I really should just Photoshop anyone who makes a counter argument and quote mine everything they've said and make them say things they didn't say, take things out of context, do all that. That's how I should fight the war. I'm unconvinced that that's the way to go. But, you have to deal with the facts is that smart people are capable of being really arrogant and really defensive, and they are just as when they have their little religion, you know, a much more sophisticated religion, let's call it. It's still a religion. It's still a bunch of dogmatic precepts that they have in their brain that have made it all okay for them. You know, that they've rationalized away the facts and made it okay to perpetrate what might be described as crimes and get away with it because everybody says it's okay. That kind of crap. All right, so the other side conversation is, you know, as soon as the subject of veganism comes up, you know, people just go a little wacky. You know, the principle is, are you for or against? In the sense of, are you, you know, do you think it's a good idea for human beings to exploit animals for their sustenance? Now, some argument can be made that some exploitation is just a fact of existence. So right now we're exploiting the biosphere in the sense that the biosphere is producing our oxygen, and the biosphere isn't as rich if you deny it its nutrients, which is the fodder of the dead creatures. It's all a dependent system, and so every breath you take is, in some sense, at something else's expense. They have to go through this turned into fertilizer process for your benefit. You know, and so you can really cut it fine. Now, whether you're going to have an argument about what is sentient and what isn't, so that's another part of it, but some people think everything that squirms, it has a brain and is experiencing. So, well, that's not a convincing argument in my opinion. So things like clams or something, you know, jellyfish or some other kind of organism that's not very organed, okay? It doesn't have a very sophisticated brain, and there seems to be little prospect that it can do, that it can learn. Therefore, reward and punishment doesn't have much meaning to it, and therefore it's not experiencing good and bad days and all of that kind of crap. And so it really doesn't matter if you farm such creatures, like plants, for example. No real prospect that they have any element of consciousness to be concerned with, a welfare stake. All right. So it's yeah. So the people are just very fanatic about words. They're easy to trigger. So they lose the forest through the trees kind of thing. They lose the tree through the forest or the forest through the trees. It doesn't matter. Their perspective is distorted. And I would argue that the biggest distortion in the perspective is that claiming to be vegan or stating that you prefer to be as vegan as possible or as vegetarian as possible, whatever. I mean, I see these words as just, it's not some sort of philosophical statement beyond saying, yes, I don't think animal exploitation is great, so I reduce my consumption of exploited animal. And obviously vegetarian is a huge, I would argue that, vegetarian is 90% of accomplishing the task, and the veganism is just a little extra philosophical statement. And I would say the extra philosophical statement of, well, obviously, I think there's going to be plenty of vegetarians who say, yeah, I don't have to wear leather. I don't have to have leather seats. Sure, no problem. But the fact is that we have a bunch of cows that are still being consumed and a lot of hide. And so you're not really stopping the exploitation by not using leather. So it gets to be a complicated issue. And then you could argue the same things with some dairy products, that until you stop making the dairy cattle for the purpose of supplements for baby feeding and all of that kind of stuff, it's going to exist anyway. So will you just throw it out? That would be stupid. You've exploited the animal, harmed the animal. No point in throwing its carcass in the garbage, frankly. That's just inefficient. So I've made an analogy to roadkill. I could still be a perfectly good vegetarian in every philosophical way if I ate animals killed on the road. I haven't compromised the philosophy in any way. In some sense, I'm making another philosophical statement, which is, well, we should be as efficient as possible in our existence. So I'm besides being a vegetarian, I'm an efficiencyist. And so obviously I would see efficiency in not throwing away suffering, not having something suffer for nothing. Make as much value out of the death as possible. So, but everybody wants to fight about these little details. And then the bigger picture still is that I'd say, personally, I don't think this solves the problem. Now, everybody becoming vegan will not in any way, it's just a drop, just one drop in not necessarily an ocean, but in, let's say, a lake or a pond anyway, in a substantial body of water, where nature's already, the carnage, in nature is just obscene. And, I've used the sea turtle example. A mature sea turtle can lay, 100,000 eggs in its lifetime. Two of them, on average, will survive. Two. Replacement population. Maybe 3, 4. So, 100,000, 4 get to be adults. Those kind of numbers. Which, I'm sorry, if you have any kind of empathy, you wouldn't sentence your kids to live that life, I don't think. Where you die every 15 minutes. Start over again, start over again, start over again. I mean, if it was a video game and it was so gruesome, that you just kept getting wiped out, 7 seconds. Oh, I lasted, I got 14 minutes. Wow, that's a record. I lasted 14 minutes before nature snuffed me. And if we were playing real dice, if we were rolling the real sentient being dice, that's sort of the numbers are like that. it's this, you get a tiny speck of I'm alive, oh, I'm fucked, I'm fucked, I'm fucked, I'm fucked. Your foobar all over the place. Your food all over the place, and so if I just draw that, maybe I'll attempt to draw some of this that way, probably. But there's nothing, I'm just going to be drawing symbols and just saying, how can you justify and how do you explain? But again, the counter argument will just be mush, And, in the first years on YouTube, you really thought that a lot of this argument just depended on people's perspective regarding the existence of a God, So atheism seemed a really important conceptual view, and I still think it's really important. But the truth is that atheism doesn't have the force, it doesn't have the form of just being untraditional religion. Because you can kind of see that the motivation, the religious notions still exist in people's heads big time. And now they're using this quantum crap to create like quantum life and quantum brain and quantum consciousness. And, they're using science and the austere kind of cold facts, and they're trying to turn them into fluffy facts and happy facts. Dawkins naming a book, after doing The Selfish Gene, and he does a book called the Greatest Show on Earth. As if this carnage is a great show, as if somehow, it's like somebody writing about the feeding the Christians to the lions or something and saying what a great show it really was. We ought to bring that back. It's really obscenely insensitive, just as a title. It's, it might be an interesting phenomenon, you could say, and that even that is being a little bit cold in terms of unnecessarily non-recognizing the huge price paid for it. Like somebody could study a mental patient, and they could talk about how many times he bangs his head against the wall and how much drool comes out of his mouth, and measure these things and say, isn't it interesting, these proportions and how many times, calculating the number of interactions per minute or something. Say these are interesting statistics. Yeah, but that's really not. It's not really not that. It's not in any way interesting compared to the part that should be interesting, in that the being is suffering as it's going through the process. and you're not paying any attention to that would be kind of, I mean, somebody would call that scientist very naive. They might even compare him to Dr. Frankenstein or something, like, what the fuck were you thinking? You know, talk about unnecessary surgery. Ooh. Yeah. Ooh. So, yeah, so the problem isn't just religion in the sense of the regular form of it. You know, it's not just that people are moronically religious, like they'll attach themselves to these old religions that have obvious, you know, obviously made up religions, obviously just silly storytelling that, you know, none of this crap happened, it's just bullshit. But the new religion is still, it's made out of the same wish for a purpose and a function, and that somehow we're on some meaningful pursuit, you know, going to the future, you know, and it's going to be some sort of magical place where, you know, we'll take the perfect drug and all just sit in our perfect drug psychosis and play our synthetic game of accomplishment, or whatever however they view this eternal end. And they really don't have a view of it, frankly, because they can't make a movie showing it. You know, unless it looks like Coma or something, you know, we'll all be hanging from strings and we'll pretend we're all having interesting lives. Or The Matrix, you know, and even The Matrix, they couldn't pull it off in terms of doing it fair to the subject, in the sense they couldn't even, they said, oh yeah, well, no point in making a Matrix that's perfect, because then we can't have this conflict with the real people versus the fake people. You know, so we have to make the Matrix mundane, you know, so we have some reason to want to get out. But they still haven't described what the good Matrix would be. You know, like there's, you know, some ends that we could actually get to where we wouldn't get redundant, you know. Yes, we could just take away our memories every day, you know, and then just relive the same day over and over as if it's a great day, you know, because we're gonna catch the biggest fish, and, you know, conquer the prettiest woman, and do this and do that. Oh, we're gonna do all these wonderful, interesting things, and then we could all start over all again and do it all over again, and, you know, some brain just chasing ambitions, just, you know, chasing the dragon. So, you know, they're just chasing a kind of euphoria, or peace of mind, or satisfaction of anxiety, reduction of concern and worry, and, you know, the oppression, release of the impression, an explosion of euphoria, an explosion of this liberation from our burdens of failure and dismal prospects and doom. And so we're relieved. We're given a get out of jail the free card. You know, it just falls from this, get out of jail free, and you get out of jail. You know, you could just make that scenario, right? It doesn't matter what the scenario is. You have some guy who has a life sentence in jail, and he finds out one day, you're free. Oh, we were wrong. You were innocent. Blah, blah, blah. And you, can, you know, walk into the world again and do, you know, eat when you want to eat, do all those kind of things again. You know, so we can just write any kind of silly story that just has, you know, that improves. You know, you could just have a slave being whipped 100 times a day, and you could only whip him 50 times tomorrow, and that would be a great story. You know, a great story for that particular slave. Yeah, I got whipped 50 times today. Oh, it was so much better. You know, and that's all these are, just still silly stories. The story of the chase, the drama. You know, oh, he got me, but I got away. You know, could be a great story, but you know, it's an improvement over the other story you could write. But that's all it is, and it's there's just way too much paid for it. There's way too many bad stories for the few good stories. Most of the stories are you being pushed into the cellar, you being locked up in the cage, you spending decades in the cage, you know, for that one little story day where you get out and you have that great liberation. You know, so what did you pay for it? How much did you pay for it to have the oppression? How many lonely days did you spend, you know, wanting? to create the deprivation that makes you appreciate having, and that's mostly what having, any appreciation for having, is built out of, is being deprived of it for a long time, and to endure much hardship to give you that appreciation. So this doesn't work very well, is the simple point. And all these people defending it as working well, defending it against some ambiguous statement, that, oh, it doesn't work very well, it's running a deficit, it's not profitable. And they're so aggressive in defending against this accusation, that they have to do all these distortions and perversions of the simple story, the simple factual statement being made that they don't have any counter argument for. And it really does point to them being cruel and insensitive, and they don't want that label, but that's what it all points to. There's no other way to look at it. Okay, so I mean, if you're defending meat eating with some irrational mush about how, a million years ago human beings were eating meat in some kind of, regular, it was a part of the regular diet, is just such crap. Because for most of them, until they controlled fire really well, there was no way to do it. It just wasn't practical. There wasn't any practical. We couldn't digest it. It wouldn't do you any good. It doesn't taste good. I mean, there's just no rationality to it all. It doesn't make any sense at all. We don't have the hardware for it. I mean, these are all just facts. And yet they'll keep insisting that this is our nature. We must obey. We must be obedient to this feature of nature. When all the other features of nature, we say the hell with it. Fuck nature. I'm a woman. I don't want to take light of it, but obviously people are augmenting the shit out of nature. So I prefer not to have a beard. Because I think nature, that was a really bad idea. So lots of things we do to augment, change the nature of things, and yet when it comes to, they'll have to preserve nature here when it comes to us being cruel. That's the one they can't figure out. So these stupid cosmetic ones, these ones maybe about getting more chicks or getting something, those they'll augment. But the one where you're actually causing a cruelty, oh no, that one they wouldn't change. So they're almost arguing, is like, if we were Tyrannosauruses, if Tyrannosaurus had gotten intelligence first, language, that somehow they'd sit there with their little pinkies out, drinking their tea, having conversations about how, well, we must torture the animals first. It's our nature to chase them and then torture them. Like, they could have so many levels of conversation. First they could have a level of conversation where they say, well, it's in our nature to actually hunt them and torture them because that's part of our fun. And then, there's a conversation about, well, let's just kill them in some humane way and then eat them. And then they get into the whole thing, well, it's not just about killing them, it's how did you shove 458,000 of them in a, 50 square foot building? So they never saw the sunlight, they never saw anything, they just sat in a cage and, could turn their head a little bit. How cruel were you in producing your food? Of course, they'd have to have the conversations because they're inevitable in terms of you walk into this just basic idea that, how do you get around the fact that your sentience is not the only one on the planet? I mean, it's, so this gets to the nihilist kind of arguments and whatnot where they think a me is all there is, and everything else I can believe it's synthetic. It's just a video game. And I don't have to take any of it seriously because I don't feel its pain doesn't exist. And it's almost that stupid. Or if I don't feel some empathy, like some sort of force inside of me generates some sort of emotional feeling where I identify enough to say, boy, I sure wouldn't want that to happen to me. So it's like it doesn't even occur to them to say, well, what if it was me? That doesn't occur to them. No, I think they're pretending not to do it because I don't know how you avoid reasonably not projecting to understand the experience. You have to sort of say, what would it be like? You have to imagine it, and as soon as you imagine it, you're the one playing the role. So I don't even know how they evade it that way without being really, really illogical. So, you know, this channel is sort of devoted to a really simple argument, but it can be made from lots of directions. But the simple argument is there is no redeeming story to our existence. We really are bacteria with brains. We really are just a manifestation of gladiator that has evolved to a certain level where, like a thinking Tyrannosaurus or a vocabulary enabled Tyrannosaurus, yes, we have a physical nature, but we clearly do have our little pinkies out. Okay, I mean we've clearly achieved civilization, and through that process we know that there's inefficient and efficient ways to do things. That you have to have flat sidewalks, and you got to have roads that are sensible to navigate, and all of this kind of stuff. So you do things based on some understanding of what waste is, and that labor shouldn't be wasted, and that we should maximize our performance, and all of those kind of conversations that you have when you're acquiring some knowledge of the maze you were all playing in, and that it has to be, like I said, you want as few harms to take place. You don't want people slipping on banana peels, for example. You don't want them catching diseases because you have the sewage running in the streets, let alone the aesthetic unpleasantness of such a circumstance. So you become refined in your function based on your acquisition of knowledge, and it enables you to have a conversation about what the hell kind of story we're writing here. Well, anyway, so that's just all that it is. So once the brain evolves, the evolution is really just ideas. So you have a certain kind of evolution that gets you to a point, a level of the staircase, and a new staircase, can go off of that. A new thing is being evolved. So life sort of did that, right? Life first started off with just cellular organisms, and then there was a plateau of cellular organisms, and then that grew this new thing where you take a whole bunch of cells and put them together and create brains and create all kinds of organs. So you duplicate the process out of the process. So you use the process to get to a point, and then you use those bricks, use the buildings, you build a certain kind of building, and then use that building to build bigger buildings, another kind of building. And then intelligence would be a third plateau where you grow a new kind of evolution, the evolution of ideas and the evolution of knowledge. So I would argue in the evolution of knowledge that it's a pretty hard fact that there is no wooey bits to this. There's no God that created it. It all came out of this evolution thing. The chemistry evolved. The chemistry became biology. The biology became ideas. Conscious experience and other manifestations of that development. They're just tools. So just like the crocodile has its tools, and the lizard has it, they all have tool equipped, and we're tool equipped. And the major tool we have is the tool of modeling and manipulation. We can model, and then we can manipulate the model with this bigger brain. And the key event was vocabulary. We didn't progressively become capable of being smart. It was just one day language was, a full language was possible, and a few hundred years later it was, it wasn't, we weren't there yet, and then we were there. And I would argue there's lots of, see, you have to do all these little subtly deeper arguments that what's the big distinction between us and the other apes. Well, the most obvious one is that we're disabled. For the first 4 years of our life, we're not much of a functioning device. So we're still wobbling about, at least for the first 2 or 3. You can't even walk straight. Totally unsurvivable. And why would that be? Well, the simple argument would be that's because we're acquiring this capacity to do language. And, it's a rewrite of the operating system, essentially. There is no operating system. It's a really crude one to start with. And you have to refine it to language. So if language is going to be part of your life, then you need that early, slow maturation for that process to take place. And if it doesn't take place, you're stuck, with, being not futile, but broken. And you're lost a huge part of our capacity to function. Well, anyway, so there's so many, there's so many arguments in evolution, and then somebody could argue, well, evolution doesn't ever create things that don't turn into something. Well, of course it does. It creates lots of things that you never use, and that you don't get rid of them until they're in the way. So yeah, we got the capacity to do language, but we didn't have anything to do with it. We didn't have a language, right? We had to be capable of learning a language before language existed. I mean, that's the irony. So we were smart enough to go to school, but there weren't any schools. I mean, that's the joke of it. So we had this great capacity to do nuclear physics, but no one taught them nuclear physics, so they couldn't do the nuclear physics. I mean, it's kind of funny, almost, that we ever got to this point, because there's such a subtle improvement in functionality based on having a bad language, a very inefficient language. You don't get much of an improvement in your function. So why does it, the very fact that we were able to jump that hurdle of not very efficient is just evidence of what evolution does, and why after 4 billion years of life teeming on Earth, most of it's still doing trilobite crap. Okay, most of it's not doing this. It hasn't gotten to the plateau, and it hasn't climbed the intelligence ladder at all. It hasn't done any of that stuff because there wasn't enough value in it. Didn't have anything to do with feeding the machine, putting food in, running the machine. It's too abstract from the crude function, which is eat or be eaten. And so doing this higher-minded thing doesn't make you survive better. Just as being smart tends to make you reproduce less. This is just statistical facts. You're less reckless. You don't make lots of mistakes. Okay, you reduce the number of mistakes in your life. You're kind of good in your habits of taking care of things, changing the oil in your car, doing all the things it takes to keep yourself functional. Where the dumb, reckless people have lots of babies, and they don't care about how many of them turn out okay, and all that kind of stuff isn't terribly relevant. Having life insurance, covering the bases isn't their business. So that recklessness creates a lot of extra survivability, but it doesn't create high efficiency and function. Oh, so anyway. So the first argument is that you can't really have the argument until you accept certain points, and so these points I guess people will en masse reject, but there really isn't any evidence of anything beyond this crude evolution thing. It's illustrated by characters like this. That's what the evolution's doing. It's making machines that consume. It's making Godzillas, and it's making donuts for the Godzilla to eat, and that's the system. It's just the fish eating the fish, eating the fish, eating the fish. And you can see it in the ocean. What's the smartest thing in the ocean? An octopus? Shark? Not very smart. Not doing any of this pinky crap anyway, for certain. And the smartest, the mammals are smarter, obviously the whales and the porpoises, but they came from the land, went back to the sea. Just another point to just prove that this life thing has been going on an awful long time. Can you imagine how, such a long period of time that something actually came out of the water, grew legs, became capable of surviving, the seawater's now inside, and get a shell, go to all this trouble, and, figure out how to live on land and the green and the mountains and do all this stuff, and then they plowed themselves right back into the water again, and are trying to become a fish again. It's just, it's kind of funny. But you just can imagine how long that kind of evolution would take. So we've been here a long time, life, just doing this horrible business of eating each other to steal the sunlight, right? So everything's a solar panel, essentially, and a battery. And, You're just trying to gain the energy to build, to make your eggs, and to, you know, create your next generation. And the argument is that by you watching your brother die, because he's a little bit less strong than you, or he has some feature that you have a feature that makes you better than him, you're taller or something else, and so you watch him die or get killed by attrition, and then you get to do the producing, you know, and that's like all our ancestors survived the plague, and all our ancestors survived all the horrors that took place in history. They have somehow, you know, they were in the war, but they didn't get killed by the war, and, you know, they had to survive all of these things for you to be here. And so they had to watch all this other stuff get, you know, brutally killed. And that's part of your heritage as a survivor, okay, is the fact that, you know, it's been at this insane price, and you know, and what you were earning were just not necessarily great things. Like a lot of the people who survived because they ran, you know, from their response. They left the house and left the wife and kid to die of the plague. You know, they're weasels. You know, a lot of your ancestors were connivers and schemers and other kinds of rape and pillagers. And so you have a lot of that. A lot of it's negative. You didn't survive in some great honorable way. You survived, your ancestors survived by being, you know, by forcing somebody else to drink the tainted water. You know, that kind of thing. So it's not a great story. Well, anyway, getting back. So the point is, if you really have to believe, you know, this whole thing is just the product of evolution, and you know, there isn't any redeeming function. There's no intelligence out there has some brilliant idea and this whole thing is going somewhere. It's not going somewhere. Okay, it's not going to please God. It's not functioning for His entertainment. And even if it was, you should be a little bit cynical about that. It's clearly a horribly imperfect creation. You know, do you really think everybody who dies horribly was because they sinned in some way? Do you really think they're getting what they deserve? Do you think that's really happening here on this planet? I mean, come on, it's a silly story, silly narrative. It's just the evolution of chemical functions. All right, and the fact is they get into arrangements that work, that preserve their survivability, and especially when they became genetic, that became exclusively the function almost. That's all that was engineering it, was survivability. And so we've become survivable arrangements of chemistry because everything is forced to go into a certain order. Certain cells are forced to be his nose and his eyes and his teeth, and all this stuff is being forced, okay, by a bunch of chemical interactions. So I'm finding it irritating that, yes, you know, I'm going through all these arguments for this when, you know, these arguments have existed. These arguments shouldn't even have to be made. God should have been dead a long time ago. The notion of it should have been dead. And it's just such an embarrassment to human intelligence that we still have to make these arguments to people because, you know, again, it's the stupid people who are having kids. And the stupid people are, you know, in a much higher percentage, I mean, hugely higher percentage, religious. And so ignorance keeps breeding. And the, you know, none of them are, they seem very resistant, okay, to letting that go. And, you know, accept the real world that exists. And the real world just doesn't include that redeeming story. There's no redeeming end here. So all you have is, all right, so now just get to the point of the video, which is just to make this simple argument that really can't be, you know, there's no way to argue against the practical fact of it. That all right, so I'll put the other camera on and draw on the board just to get to it, frankly. But that means I have to remember what camera it's on. Ah, that one. All right. So, so we're just stuck with this. Okay, we're survival machines, and that's what we do. We survive, and we don't necessarily. Oh, that's not necessarily a much better picture, is it? I thought it would be closer, frankly, and it isn't. All right, well, this I should have done ahead of time. It's my bad. It's not much of an improvement, but we'll accept that it's good enough. That's what we'll say anyway. Yeah, it's really not. I should be able to get closer to the board. I wonder if I can do that. Well, anyway, I wonder if I can do that with some synthetic manipulation. So here, one brain. Like I said, I put your little arms that way. And that's all you are. You're a brain. So it's just this brain that has your ideas in it, your notions and all that kind of crap. And it was raised by brains. Okay, so it was influenced by other people, parents and such. I guess that makes sense, sort of. One of them has to have that, and the other one has these boobs. But anyway, so you have your parents and then the cultural influences and other things that control what your brain is. So your little USA brain. And so you're going to have some certain perceptions of reality because of that. So there's all these little influences that control what your little brain thinks. And what's being proposed to you is that, yes, you feel. Okay, so you have feelings. You have an experience. You have good and bad days, and that's just a fact. You have good and bad minutes, okay? Ones that you'd like to do more of, and ones you'd like to never have again, okay? And that's what's at stake in your existence, is you know that if I have these little addictions, little attachments to things, little trials I run every day about having a good day. Is like, the car works, and I get to the store and I buy cheap stuff, and I get a good deal, and I get a coupon, and I get half price, and blah, blah, blah. And so that's a successful day, is whatever your little ambition is. You went out and you flirted with some girls, and, you impressed them, and they all giggled, and la, 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 la. So you got somewhere, and, oh, it's a good day. And so your little brain feels good because it's a good day. And then you have the opposite kind of day where, nothing goes right, and the car breaks down, and, it's for a stupid reason, and you feel humiliated, and blah, 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 blah. So you have this good and bad stuff happens to you. Now you got the real hard stuff is out there also, like you could get cancer, or you could actually be, in a car accident, some kind of crap happens, very unpleasant, teeth break, all kinds of things can happen that really make you miserable. Get an infection of some kind, you're allergic to penicillin, not going to work out too well, you get Lyme disease. I mean, it's just all this little crap that can happen to make this life, kind of expensive. So what's being proposed is that you're sitting here saying, okay, you are a pro-lifer. So for whatever reason, you are of the opinion that this is good. Life, okay, living, being forced to live, you're lucky. You're lucky if you're alive, right? It's a good thing to be alive. It's so much better than being dead somehow. Now, obviously, somebody could just argue being dead is completely benign. I mean, it's just not a problem. That really isn't satisfactory, but we'll have to just live with it for now. It's just the way it is. Maybe I should draw more over here. Well, that's sort of where I was heading. I was sort of heading in this direction. All right, so you're pro-life, okay, and maybe you have a few conditions, like, no, you shouldn't have a baby if you know it's deformed. So if you know it's, deformed in the uterus, you should abort it. So maybe you have some apprehension about being totally pro-life, but you'll accept lots of failure in life. You think, generally speaking, it's a good thing because you, on balance, are happy. Okay, you have more happy than sad. You have more relief than you have trauma. Now, I'd say you is being pretty stupid because you has to realize that you haven't died yet. So you haven't done old, okay, and you haven't done dead, okay, dying, okay. The actual dying, well, that doesn't, dying, that would be ding. You really have to have the E in there, don't you? So you haven't done any of that yet. So, your opinion might not be worth much, because if you're not including the worst possible death, you know, and the disabled, you know, and disability. If you're not accepting that you might be one of those people when they get old, to get arthritis in every single joint, and it's terribly painful, and you have to go through surgeries and replace knees or hips or some other kind of, oh man, you know, they're not including the real deal in your imagination of what you think your life is going to be and how it's going to work out, and that somehow, you know, you're going to die before your love of your life, your little wifey or whatever you have, and that, oh, that's going to go fine too. She'll die and I won't care. You'll, you know, give me more time to go fishing and whatnot. I mean, maybe that's going to be true for you, but you know, the point is you're supposed to be appreciating what it is, the real reality, and what the real prospects are, not your hopes, okay, and not your your assumptions about how you're going to be immune. You're not going to go blind first, you know. You're not going to go blind as you get old. Your eyes aren't going to get all bloated and, you know, have to be, you know, excised. You know, none of those things that happen to all those other people are going to happen to you. All right, so the simple sentence is, okay, you have to know that this is really mixed baggy, this life thing, okay, that there's really good reason to be afraid, good reason to be a bit apprehensive about stepping into it. And so the simple equation is you're basically saying you're pro-life as long as it's being imposed on somebody else. You know, so as long as you're opposing it on, you know, in all these underprivileged countries, as long as that's another being and it's not you, you're saying probably you're pro-life, right? But if it had to be you, if you had to live all these other lives, like we just take all the other lives and put them on standby so you can live their life. Are you still going to be pro-life? I mean, are you still going to want to live all the possible lives with all the possible outcomes? I mean, all the people that get hit by a car and they're disabled for the rest of their life, and blah, blah, wheelchairs and poop bags and all kinds of, you know, really nasty shit. You're really going to want to do all of those lives and say, yeah, it's worth it. Because some of those lives will be good ones, you know, where I'll be rich and famous. And you know, being rich and famous is great, right? Because that always turns out great, right? All the rich and famous people are just great people, right? They're not dysfunctional. They're not alcoholics. They're not, you know, they don't hang themselves from doorknobs and shit. No, that never happens. Yeah, so realistically. So this is the game of life for just humans. And this doesn't even include all the frickin' animal attrition, right? So, you know, cats have, you know, 5 to 7 kittens, you know, something like that. Whatever the average is. 6, 5.5, I don't know, average a number of kittens. And then the female in her life will have maybe 25 to 30 kittens. I mean, and some, you know, 60, you know, some of them really, oof. And the statistics demand that, you know, 90% of them have to be killed. And they have to be killed before they reach maturation. 90%. So you're for watching 90% of the kittens get killed. To get run over, to get killed by disease, to be, you know, bitten by a rabid squirrel, whatever the fuck it is. You're for that. You're saying that's an acceptable price. I'll pay that price. I'll kill 90% of the children. Okay, so if that was what it was for humans, if 90% of the kids, if 90% of the children born, babies born, had to be killed in the first 10 or 15 years, you'd say it's still okay. It's still a good deal. I mean, that's logically what you're saying, right? Because that's logically the state of the game. And those are, you know, it's realistic to understand that that's pretty much what does happen, right? Because we know they become drug addicts, they become ignoramuses because they don't go to school or don't, you know, pay attention enough. All kinds of dysfunction in the human existence. So you can make the comparison. But the point is that you really do have to consider all sentient life. You can't just consider the human condition when you're voting to start the game. To say, yes, initialize the life game. Promote it. Keep putting quarters in the machine. Keep it running. Do whatever you can to make more of it. Okay? To sustain it in its present circumstances. And that's what you're voting for. So you're voting for a system that's essentially just saying, as long as it's something else that's paying the price, and I don't personally have to worry about it, You know, I have immunity to cholera because I don't live in a place that's going to get it. And I have immunity to Bucci disease, and you know, because I'm not living where that is. Is that all you're really saying? Is that I'm okay, so who cares if the rest of the living things aren't? And they're not going to fare as well. I'm not going to have to experience it, so it doesn't matter. So it's not exactly how I wanted to state it, but understand what you're voting for. So when you're pro-life, just understand what you're saying. You're saying, yes, I will impose on these beings, these anonymous, you know, people who are going to experience the worst case scenarios. Their worst case isn't in any way, does it take away from my best case. All right. So, or my whatever case, good enough case. So my good enough case, somehow, one of those can overcome 2 or 3 or 10 of these worst cases. And we know that's like what's happening with most people. Most people are educated, right? So, you know, it's only still, whatever, 1.4 or 2% of the whole human population that's college educated. Still a tiny number, okay? So just understand, these are mostly college-educated people talking about how grand it is to be ignorant and how it's a great thing to do. And yes, we this, make more people, make more people, make more people. You know, when what they're really saying is, no, make more civilization maybe, make more of this, make more of me, but don't make more of thems, okay? So, all right, and that to me is, that's a legitimate argument. I mean, we're making way too many thems, okay, in terms of we're making people in irresponsible ways. And we have lots of, like I said, nature does it all the time. I mean, there's animals in circumstances they shouldn't be in, and that's why their life sucks. Like possums have migrated into territories where it's way too cold for them. They don't survive the winters well. You know, it's very hard, very brutal. So they should stop doing that. Well, they can't stop doing it. We're the only ones who can do it. And we don't want to spend any of our, I want candy. You know, we don't want to compromise having our candy, you know, to spend the money on possum relocation. We don't want to be bothered. Just like we don't want to stop the feral cat problem because we don't want to spend any real money on it. And all the money we do get, we spend on doing this pro-life thing where we sit there and pretend we're rescuing them by cutting their nuts off and throwing them in the street to eat garbage and get run over by a car. So none of it makes any sense, frankly. So, I mean, this is a simple argument. Is that, would you really think there's the happy people on earth are undoing all of the misery of the sad people? You know, the suffering peoples, all of their angst and pain and all of that is all made okay because some of you are comfortable. And I don't even know in what way you could be comfortable. Like I say, even if I'm physically comfortable, it's really hard for me to be psychologically comfortable living on Earth because I know I'm doomed. I mean, I know I'm going to do this old dying thing. And who the hell wants to do that? What the hell good is that? Only a lunatic would get on this roller coaster, frankly. When you know what the roller coaster's doing, when you watch it, okay, and you watch all the crap all the harm that's happening all over the place every time this thing goes around the track, you have to be insane to sit there and say, I'd get back on. And maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's all just talk. You'd get back on if you could control what seat you have to sit in. You don't have to sit in the seat with vomit on it. You know, then, oh yeah, I'll get back on. You know, as long as I don't have to endure the worst of it. Isn't that all you're really saying? That I'll get back on if we have a fantasy conversation about a fake reality. But if I had to really do, you know, what's the next living, like every second, you know, there's trillions of living things created. But let's just say there was only one new living thing created in the next second, right? So the next second's going to happen. And there'll be a new little life form. Yay! We have a new little stork arrived, and a little new life form pops into existence. La 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 la. Little egg hatches. Would you really want to be the hatchling? Do you really think your odds are, oh yeah, I have favorable odds, it's going to go very well? I'm not going to get picked up by a seagull right on the beach, you know, and pecked to death. No, that's not going to happen. Even though that happens all the time. It's not going to happen to me. I'm going to be the lucky one. 10 minutes later, I'm going to be eaten by a shark. You know, I mean, it's just so stupid. And you know, it's just like I said. I mean, so you can beat it to death, and I mean, I guess that's what I have to do. Is I just have to keep going through all these, you know, permutations of what the real game is we're playing, which is a torture game. And if you're pro-life, you're just Dr. Frankenstein saying, "Yeah, let's do it again. Let's do it again." It wasn't a failure; it was a perfect success, right? Yeah, a bunch of scar tissue, a bunch of healing time, and then he goes out into the world, and we pitchfork him to death or burn him in a castle. What went wrong? How did anything go bad? No, that's a great story. No. So anyway, yeah, so I'll call that a video. I've called it, declared it so. This chair is just not quite right. I can turn that off. Alright, so next time I have to work on my technology here, because that didn't go too well. Is this the right one? No, that's not it. I have to do this one. Alright, so anyway. So yeah, it's a really simple argument that the price is way too high. If you had to pay all of the prices, if you had to experience all of the people running huge deficits, if you had to live those lives, I think you'd have some appreciation for why, yeah, maybe that ambition thing where I'm just, it's a trivial gratification. You get the girl and then you find out she's a fucking moron. I really don't want to call her. I don't want the second date. You thought you were getting somewhere. Oh, no, that was a false alarm. I mean, really, is it really worth it? You chasing your little, fix. They just put the heroin or the nicotine, in front of you, and you just keep chasing it. That's really worth torturing all of this stuff for? Oh, please. Come on, you're not that stupid. I mean, you obviously are, but I just mean, come on, you can't defend being that stupid. I mean, you really can't. And the only way you're going to defend it was with mush, religious mush, pie in the sky. Oh, someday we'll fix everything, and then we'll play a really good game of nothing. I mean, you have to understand, you're built to chase. You're built to play a game that's stupid. You're built to play a competition game. That's what your whole ego is built out of, is just doing better than the other guy kind of thing. And that's the nature of the beast, is to just keep saying, I'm doing better than them, I'm doing better, I'm doing better. And, and it's a cheap fix. It's not a great drug you're taking. Your little happiness bullshit. It's not made out of anything with any integrity. And all of the suffering, all of the dead children, so to speak, is real. And it's expensive, and it's pain, and it's horrible. And you're just trivializing it by doing this pro-life thing. You're spitting on torture. You're just, you're trivializing the most important thing that takes place here. Ugh. All right. And you're doing it because your brain has these stupid notions in it that I must preserve the integrity of the silly story we've been telling ourselves, that we're accomplished and we're functioning well and everything's just fine. And it's just a silly story to justify a bunch of horrible behavior. A bunch of selfish acquisition. I mean, you see it. I mean, even in the politics and stuff, this should be the grandest mission of somebody, is to improve the human condition for the human race. And what do they do when they get power? They just improve their own condition. They just employ their own kids or do this or do, they just do the same old bullshit. What's in it for me? And what's in it for the cause gets lost. So anyway, I'm banging into that thing again. Yeah, I'll call it a video. So, till the next time and such. I don't know. How much time is it? It doesn't say. Weird. Oh, 59 minutes. Oh, that's right on. That's very close to what it should be. So, good enough. Alright, so, till the next time and such. And so forth and whatnot. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just getting tired. It's this. This is, it's much more daunting a task communicating with humans than it should be. And that's just another one of those sad facts. It's a fact, so I have to endeavor to persevere. Right? I have to take some vitamins. All right, anyway, until the next time and such, so forth and whatnot.